Dale Vanis, okay.
New mayor. Oh. They live in my neighborhood.
Okay.
Berkowitz.
Okay. Is he? Okay, gotcha.
No, I
Yeah,
look like a
okay.
pinhead, but it's cool.
This was Galen Crow. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Okay.
Mayor, Jamie is texting me to say he intends to dial in.
He's going to dial in?
Scott is giving him the appropriate information because he's out of town for work.
Okay. And we do know that Jamie's calling in?
No, we didn't know that.
Oh, we didn't? Oh, okay. All right. Well,
Huh? Yes, he's away on business.
okay. Right. Okay. We're going to go ahead and call the special meeting of the Bloomington City Council to order. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderman Matthey. Alderman Sage.
Here.
Alderman Malamoy. Alderman Burgess. Here. Alderman Painter. Here. Alderman Schmidt. Here. Alderman Black. Here. Alderman Hallman. Here. Alderman Bray. Here. Mayor Renner.
Here. Thank you very much. Before we do public comment, I wonder if we could have a motion to permit Alderman Matthey to participate virtually as he's away on business.
Second.
Okay. Moved by, very quickly, moved by Alderwoman Howman, seconded by Alderwoman Schmidt. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
Alderman Sage.
Yes.
Alderman Burgess. Yes. Alderman Painter. Yes. Alderman Schmidt. Yes. Alderman Black. Yes. Alderman Hallman. Yes. Alderman Bray. Yes.
Great. Okay. And at this point, do we have any public comment cards? Okay. We'll move right along to presentation of certificates from this. Oh, there he is. We got him? Jamie, are you there?
Hello?
Barely. Jamie? Can you hear us?
I absolutely can. Can you hear me?
Now we can. And actually, we can hear you better than the rest of us can hear each other. Thank you. What a booming voice.
Thank you.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks, Jamie. And we had, believe it or not, you need to call Ripley's because we had no public comment. But right now we do have a presentation of certificates to the Bloomington 101 participants from the spring 2018. And I before I do this, I would be remiss, if not just a downright degenerate mayor, if I did not thank Nora Dukowitz for making all of this happen. Nora, thank you so much. As I call your name, or perhaps mispronounce your name, please, well, correct me, but please come forward to get your certificate. And the first is Laura Bowie. Laura, I know you're here. Congratulations. Thank you so much. Going to come as a shock. Our Charles Bowie. Thank you so much. Meryl Brown. Thank you very much. Justin Boyd. Don't see him. All right. Chris Berkowitz. Is that correct? Chris? He did not hear, or she did not hear me mispronounce their name. Okay. All right. Next, Jerry Caldwell. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks. Jeff Crable, I know, is here. Galen Crow. Now that's team spirit, if I've ever seen it. Galen Crow, okay? Abby Davis. Thanks, Abby. Thank you for participating. Appreciate it. Thanks. Next, Eden Davis. No? And we have Chris Hollingsworth. Matt Lawler. Matt. Noel Lucero. She didn't hear me. Again, mispronounce the name potentially. Greg Meyer. Greg. Justine Miller. Gary Newmeyer. Thank you, Gary. Thank you so much, Gary. Appreciate it. Great program. Great. Just reiterating, great program. No, we don't always get compliments. Matthew Ohlendorf? Matthew? No? Okay. Melanie Persnick? No? Okay. And Patricia, thank you. Sears? Patricia Sears. Brett Stevens. And last but not least, Eric Vanisdale. Vanisdale, I got that one because of your help. Thank you. Alderwoman Painter. All right, it's not here. And I do want to thank all Bloomington 101 participants for going through that. If you haven't already, see Nora. It's definitely a way to see and understand not only what city government does, but also your community. And it also, if you decide that you want to participate in a board or commission, please come forward and let me know. And Jeff has come forward and is participating from your class, so we'd certainly love to have others come forward and give us your ideas, because the more inputs that we have, the better decisions that we're going to make. And especially if we can get younger people, people from all sides of the community involved, as well as people with gray hair like myself. But the more diversity that we have, I think the better in terms of the inputs that we get from our boards and commissions, and the council itself will make better decisions. So thank you all so much. Appreciate that. Next, we move to a presentation, discussion, and possible action on a resolution outlining the city's guidelines for utilization. Oh, excuse me. Thank you, Nora. For utilization of tax increment financing in the city's utilization of tax increment financing as an economic development tool. And just to be clear, we talked a little bit about this beforehand. We're going, assuming that there's not an objection with the council, we will give up to 3 minutes, even though we didn't have anybody sign up from the taxing bodies as a public public comment to weigh in on this if they so desire at the appropriate moments, which will be fairly soon. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and I believe there are representatives from both Unit 5 and District 87 here. We did give notice to all the taxing bodies that we were going to be discussing and potentially acting on this again tonight. We wanted to provide a quick update as to some of the changes we've made in the resolution. We did incorporate some of the whereas language that had been suggested by District 87, including that we now have some language in there specifically recognizing the vital importance of public education and their commitment to the area, that we recognize that the ability to raise revenue is limited for a lot of these taxing bodies, and some other language like that. As to some additional substantive changes, we added in it, you heard a lot of discussion at the last meeting about how our policy was essentially to ensure that we were only going to TIF property that has a declining AAV or a zero property value assessment. A lot of that had been implied. After that meeting and all of that discussion, we decided to specifically put in there language that required that as part of our guidelines. So that has now been added in there. We also added language that we would notify any taxing body at least 48 hours in advance before the City Council takes final action on any TIF-related items to ensure that they're provided with ample notice and they're aware of some of the action being taken. The school district asked for that to be changed to 3 business days. Staff does not have any concern with that, so in the final version that's in front of you, you'll see that is changed to 3 business days. The only item that remains in dispute is that last subsection 8. Again, and you can see the language in the council memo that the school district had requested and the language that the city staff was recommending. And this kind of gets down to the nuts and bolts of it as to whether or not the city can provide an upfront guarantee, or whether or not, as the city staff believes, we need to review each TIF individually and each agreement individually and each project individually. So that's really where the difference came along between the two of us. That said, we believe that this does mark a new day with the city's use of TIF in the city of Bloomington. Specifically, we believe that this policy is sending a message that it is going to be the economic tool of last resort in the city of Bloomington, that we recognize it may have certain impacts on the other taxing bodies, and we want to limit that to the extent possible. This policy sets up a new groundwork for communication and coordination between not only the school district but the other taxing bodies to help make sure that there is good communication and that we're looking at ways to mitigate any impacts that these agreements may have or that TIFs may have. So this is what we believe to be a strong policy and maybe even a groundbreaking policy for the city and municipalities in the state in terms of how we're going to approach TIF with an understanding as to the potential impacts of other taxing bodies. With that, we've got Mike Weber, our TIF consultant, who is here if there are specific questions, about TIF, as well as Bob Mart, the Economic Development Director. And as I said, there are a couple of representatives from the taxing bodies as well. But at this point, we wanted to present you with what we feel is a strong policy and does shift how the city will be looking at utilization of TIF in the future.
I just have one macro level thing, and maybe Bob would be best to address this, and this would just be, this is consistent, correct, with our comprehensive plan calling for infill. This is, and I think as Mr. Juergens has suggested, the days of 54 blocks of a 23-year TIF are gone. But when we're calling for infill development, et cetera, would you say that it's fair to say that
this still supplements our comprehensive plan, and although the comprehensive plan does address that the TIF could be used as part of our toolkit, we now recognize that the impacts that it does have on our taxing districts, and that we will work with them on communication and as we propose potential redevelopment of project areas.
Okay, thank you.
And maybe just if I could say one other thing. Last time we also talked about maybe inserting some language about prevailing wage or the project labor agreements. It's our intent to bring that back in the future. As we reported, we had one meeting on that. Since the last meeting, we continue, or we're planning to have additional meetings, and likely we'll be bringing back some additional language that talks about those types of project labor agreements within TIFs, and that's something that can be added to our entire economic development guideline. And again, I think by all of this, you're setting these policies as to how our city and our economic development team is going to act, what we're going to convey to developers, what tools we're going to be able to use. And so once we have those policies fully fleshed out, they'll all be one package, and it'll be a complete direction that you're giving to staff and to the people who want to develop within the community.
Questions of Mr. Juergens? Okay. At this point, then, I think this is probably the appropriate point to ask if the taxing bodies would like to come speak up for up to 3 minutes. Thanks.
Thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to come before you tonight. Barry Riley, Superintendent, Bloomington District 87 Schools. I want you to know that I appreciate the work of Mr. Juergens, Mr. Rasmussen, Mr. Pratt, our attorney who represents us. There's been a lot of work going back and forth with this document. I do also appreciate what it takes to make economic development work, and the school district definitely plays a role in that. We recognize that. We also know that that's an important role. It's great for all of us. However, we don't look necessarily at this resolution as a guarantee, that part that Mr. Juergens was talking about. We look at it as limiting the impact on the district. I've heard and seen information that touts District 87 as the only taxing body that has shared any concern about this. I'm glad to see my colleague, Dr. Daniel, here tonight so that you can see that it's not just District 87. Whatever you decide, our intent moving forward is to work with you, of course, and try to make this the absolute best community we can. We think we've done a lot of that. When you look at the work that we've done on our campus, it's, I hope it sends a signal to you and to members of the community that we want this to be a school district that kids and families want to attend. We're excited about that, and that takes effort, and that takes money to do that. And every time we have, we limit our access to dollars, that plays an impact on that, and that can hurt us. We're looking for a lessening of that. 23 years is a long time. The TIFs that have been put in place have been for 23 years. We want to limit that impact. So again, whatever you decide, should you decide to approve this resolution as is, know that even though there's been a lot of back and forth and some give and take, in the end, it's not one that District 87 supports, but we will work closely with you to make the best of that situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barry. Mark, thanks.
Good evening. Just came out of negotiations, so...
Oh, I wonder if you could, we all know you, but could you state your name for the record?
I'm sorry. Mark Daniel, Superintendent, Unit 5. So, again, to reiterate what Dr. Riley just said, and I do believe, though, we are a partnership. We do work together to create solutions. We all know the importance of growing our community. So, therefore, very interested in being creative. As an example, as we worked with Brandt and their abatement structure, we asked for roughly 50% of that abatement to be returned to us in some kind of in-kind services. And perhaps that's something to explore in the future. But I think we are in an age where there is more and more of how do we create incentives for businesses to come. And with that, we know how important those businesses are to sustaining our property taxes, growing our businesses and our retail and so on and so forth. So always interested in that discussion. And as Dr. Riley said, always interested in having that communication. And we'd like to always offer that as a way for us to sit down and have this discussion. And truly, yes, we're all feeling the pinch of the budget. And I don't know where the solution is for that one, but I'll say it does have to, a major piece of it is economic growth. So as Dr. Riley said, what you've done to adjust, I think, again, thank you, very appreciative of that. And then we'll go move forward and look at how we can continue to be very creative in how we work together to supplement. So really that's all I wanted to say, and again, I really want to say thank you to Dr. Riley and for his team for bringing this forward, and wish the best, because as Unit 5, we're tied to both Bloomington and to Normal, so it's important for us to make sure that we do this on a constant basis, so thank you.
And thank you both for all of what you do, because one of the, certainly the things that I think that all of us can agree on wholeheartedly is that we have to have very strong elementary, secondary education schools, or we're not going to achieve our full potential, to say the least, in either Bloomington or Normal. So anyway, thank you both. Thanks. At this point, oh, did you want to ask a question?
Yes, I do, Mayor. Mm-hmm.
Yes, go ahead.
So thank you both for attending tonight and for working through this difficult problem that we're facing, and it has to do with economic development. It has to do with generating business income. So I have a couple questions about that. When you take a look at your proposed differences in Section 8, and in particular you're looking for some guarantor money to compensate or reimburse the taxing body for the property tax revenue when the TIF development doesn't give back the money that you need to sustain the school, would you say that a lot of that's driven by residential development versus business development?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question. Are you asking if within the TIF zone, residential versus business?
Yes, if a TIF is created and then that kind of tax treatment is given to a developer, and that developer steps in instead of creating a business concern, a retail or something of that nature, instead creates residential space. Do you find that that's your pain point particularly?
Well, I'll let Dr. Daniel speak a little bit to that, but in my case, there's actually means to recoup some of that. In other words, if there are residential areas within a TIF district and that causes kids to be added to the rolls, there is a means to be able to get some money. Now, it will not equal the cost per student that we have, but it is something. Most of what we have experienced, certainly in the recent ones, the Empire Street Corridor, that's more retail than it is residential. The one that you're considering most recently, the East Washington TIF, that is a residential that will not likely have additional students coming to the district. Has a potential, I'm told, for retail in the bottom. However, that remains to be seen if that comes to fruition. But in the end, there's a means if there's residents added, but it will not be the total dollars that it takes to educate a student.
So correct me if I'm wrong here, but I hear you saying that if it's residential that includes students that would attend your schools, that there will be a funding gap. And this is one piece that's potentially driving your ask for the guaranteed funds back from the city?
Certainly that's one piece of that, but not all of it, but that's one piece, sure.
Okay, thank you. And finally, this proposal of guaranteeing money back to the schools, has any other city or any other district or school area implemented something of this nature?
I have no knowledge of whether or not they have or have not.
Well, and of course, we've just gone through this process recently with Normal.
Could you come toward the microphone? I'm sorry, Mark.
So we've just gone through this process with Normal. So we extended that TIF in the area in Uptown with the idea that the total area, just a block or a very small segment of that was expanded. The reason being, they will continue to expand all of it, but they'll reimburse us for that excess surplus for the non-dedicated area. So again, that was creative, I think. But again, that was based on, it doesn't expire, I believe, until 2026. They're going to extend another 12 years to facilitate, hopefully, businesses locating in Uptown. So again, creativity, that's what I think that's where we're at, and hopefully we can do some more of those types of things. And I would just say, if there is any kind of surplus that's not being used in infrastructure, that those dollars would be then earmarked to return to the schools. We could surely, I don't know about Dr. Riley, but we could definitely use those in our maintenance and upgrade of our buildings as well. So infrastructure, perhaps in schools.
Thank you, and thank you for all you do for our community and for educating our youth. The services you provide are just invaluable, and this is how we grow community. With that said, I wouldn't support a guarantee of the nature that's been proposed, and the reason being it's just something that is from my perspective, the city taking on that guarantee obligation goes beyond somewhere where we can be as long as we bring our best efforts forward and we have good common sense and are creative in coming up with economic plans that actually match all of our goals and are seeking to be economic engines, then we should find a place where we can both benefit from the development and the use of TIF.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think what will be critical for you as a council is to scrutinize that very closely. Those who have studied the downtown TIF, that's not what occurred. There was a surplus. That surplus did not go back to the taxing bodies. That's something that we certainly don't want to see, but that's going to take your collective wisdom and oversight to ensure that that doesn't happen. We've heard that from the staff, and I believe them, but not all of us are going to be around when that TIF ends, and so that's part of why we brought this forward in a manner that at least establishes limiting. What you view as guaranteeing, we view as limiting the impact on the district. And I understand that's a play on words and semantics, but that's how we see it. In the end, I think we all want the same thing. We want economic development and growth that helps this community thrive, and all of us benefit in the end.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Alderman Black.
Thank you. Thank you both. So Kim kind of got the conversation going in the direction that I was headed in, and I guess is the ask tonight to kind of get some more feedback to get a final draft to us by next week? Is that the goal of this conversation?
It could be, but the reason we'd made this a special meeting is so that also you could vote on it should you choose to do that.
Gotcha. I think
Well, let me ask you, do you have any questions of the superintendent?
Oh, you guys can sit down, yeah.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Sorry.
Don't keep them standing
Sorry, I
there.
apologize.
Go ahead.
So from where I sit, I think what I'd like to accomplish in this, and I think we spend a lot of this conversation focused on what could come to us and how do we kind of sort that out at that point in time. And I think putting something in writing that states, similar to what the school district has proposed, District 87, I'm okay with, because we can amend that if suppose some amazing project came our way, and we would have that open line of communication, and we could find a way to get that compromise going. So the creative solutions you talked about, maybe in-kind donations, or if it's a residential area, maybe guaranteeing the component that by law we couldn't give back. That's a conversation I'd be willing to have when I have a proposal in front of me. It's very hard for me to come out of for or against something when we're in a nebulous cloud and we're trying to argue about what could come. And I don't think anything I'm seeing here in the red is limiting developers from coming to us. And I would rather take these on a case-by-case basis with the intent of saying that we care very deeply about the schools. We don't want to be encouraging projects to come in that ultimately will impact them financially. So to Kim's point, if we find a developer that wants to put in luxury apartments in a square block, and that could have a impact to the school in terms of students, it would be very important to me that we would limit the impact on them financially. And I know that the law provides for some component of that, but in terms of our collective wisdom, if you will, I would hope that the council would recognize that's something that would put a burden on our partners, and I wouldn't want that to be the case. But short of that, I don't see any problem with being cognizant and making sure that the schools are taken care of, because if the schools don't do well, we don't do well. I guess I think we're close on the District 87's proposal in the red, but I think I'm okay with being a little bit more aggressive on it ultimately, because we can sort out at a later point in time when an actual proposal comes to us if there's a bridge that needs to be gapped, how we overcome that.
Thank you. And just to, before I go to Alderman Sage, I didn't realize you had that. Many different businesses we know need different things. When Hy-Vee came to town, they wanted 3 liquor licenses. We've never given 3 liquor licenses. Well, they were going to spend $20 million, and so all they wanted was 3 liquor licenses, one for their gas station, one for their restaurant, and one for their grocery store. There were some people that were upset about that. At the end of the day, it didn't cost the city of Bloomington anything. We did have, in fact, a controversial vote on the city council, a 7-2 vote many years ago, on the Ovation Cinema. All they wanted was 1 liquor license. Green Top Grocery, a different type of facility. There was no TIF used there whatsoever. So it obviously is going to depend upon the nature of the type of project that comes forward, and we're trying to do these as surgically as possible. I think this does codify some of our previous practices, but also helps us to give a little bit of assurance to school districts who may have a memory of a 54 block TIF that was not terribly transparent, to put it charitably. Alderman Sage and then Alderwoman Burgess.
Thank you. And maybe this is a question for Steve and or Jeff, but something that Dr. Riley said caused me to at least consider this. I'm looking at Section D, Roman numeral 5. It talks about the annual reporting to the taxing districts. And I don't know why I didn't think of this before. That's my fault. Is there some value, some merit, and again, to Jeff or Steve, in terms of assigning who is responsible for delivering that annual report, so that there's some line of sight there for, so, you know, is it going to be the city manager? Is it going to be the community development director? Is it, you know, who might that be?
I think we were intending that to be the community development director, and I'll let Bob speak to that as well. But part of, you know, what he's talked about is having more meetings and more reports, and this would be part of that process.
Well, and again, it's something that Dr. Riley said with this idea of collective oversight, as well as the duration of the TIFs, that people come and people go. And so I'm asking, and perhaps even more than asking, suggesting is do we just need to add some just the briefest of wording there to that point that assigns a who, makes a particular position responsible for that annual report out.
I understand. Well, just because this wasn't part of your regular memo and it's actually part of the resolution, I'll read Section D5. Review each redevelopment project annually and report to the taxing districts in writing as to the availability of surplus funds and the intended use of surplus funds. That's one you're referencing?
Yes.
Okay. So we would normally have this annual review as part of the Joint Review Board meeting, and at the time we'll be discussing each individual TIF that we have. Right now you understand that we have 2 working TIFs, and we're looking at a proposed TIF for the downtown East Washington Street. And so when we go to those the discussion during the annual Joint Review Board meeting,
okay,
we can go into those redevelopment projects specifically and provide that information to the taxing districts during that meeting, but certainly they get an agenda before the meeting.
And so that would become just part of that annual agenda.
That is our intent.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mayor, if I could break in real quick.
Okay, yeah, Alderman Matthey and then Alderwoman Burgess.
And I apologize for breaking in. Just to Alderman Sage's point, I would like to make sure that annual report, a copy of that also is presented to City Council as well.
Right.
It's mentioned elsewhere.
Yeah.
It's not specifically called out that I saw anywhere.
Is that, Jeff, is that specifically mentioned? As I recall, my memory isn't the best.
It's Section 3, Item B, I think.
Section 3, Item B? Yeah, okay. All right.
Thank you.
Okay, sure. Alderwoman Burgess.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. I think the first one's probably for Jeff. So we're talking about a 3-page resolution, single-spaced, with numerous whereas, clauses, subsections, and sections. Am I correct that the majority of this document, except for the competing language in subsection D8, that both the city and the school districts are supporting the language there, except for that one subject section?
I believe that's correct. Is that accurate?
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So the vast majority of the document we're all good on, which is great and really a nice testament to all the work that everyone's done. So my question is, in that area where we have competing proposals for language from the city staff and the District 87, I'm trying to better understand why we haven't gotten to a consensus there and what exactly the intent of the school district's proposals or concerns are, because I think the staff's concerns are well stated in here. So my question, I think this would be for District 87 or the representation, it says in here, structure all redevelopment plans under project areas that implement the TIF Act to provide that the taxing districts benefit along with the private developers, and then goes on to have some potential ways to do that. I'm curious what that language means. What is the intent here in terms of benefit along with the private developers? Can you help me out there?
I'll ask John Pratt, District 87's attorney, to come up.
I wonder, John, we know you, but could you state your name for the record? Thanks.
John Pratt. I work for the law firm Pratt & Pratt in Bloomington. Thank you all for hearing this issue again tonight. And as Mr. Daniel said, I thought he said it quite well about being creative. That is our problem with TIFs. We've said this now, I've been a part of it for years and years, where we've asked the city council, please don't do 23-year all-in TIFs. We don't want that. I think reasonable people can differ as to whether or not TIFs do provide economic development. There's certainly been a lot of authority on both sides of that argument. But that was my attempt, or our attempt, to say, let's be creative here. Let's do something other than 23-year all-in TIFs. So I provided some examples. I didn't use the word guarantee because I don't think we can guarantee anything. But what we would like is either, the 23-year, of course, is set by a statute many, many years ago, state statute. And so rather than that relatively arbitrary 23-year period, let's use a smaller period. Or let's have the payback to the school districts faster than 23 years. Let's reduce the amount of the tax rate that goes into the TIF. Let's say just a percentage of District 87 tax rate, of course everybody else, all the other taxing bodies as well. We're looking for creativity here. That's what we're looking for. And hence that's the language. I can't do better than that.
As a follow-up to that, thank you for that explanation. So is it your intent in your proposed language to in any way limit our options or to guarantee a specific result, not knowing what the particular project is?
Well, no, it isn't. We feel like if City Council doesn't give a direction to staff, if that doesn't happen, if City Council doesn't say to staff, hey, do something other than 23-year all-in, then all you're ever going to see is the 23-year all-in. So we feel like you have to tell staff, look, we want something other than that. And if you tell staff, hey, let's do something creative here. Let's all roll up our sleeves and figure this out for the benefit of the community as a whole. Then I think we will roll up our sleeves at the table and look at each project. The communication between the staff and the city, or the staff and District 87, I'd say has been pretty good, except for this one issue where we say, hey, let's do something other than 23-year all-in, and staff says no. And that's exactly where we are tonight. And again, I think the focus of this Section 8 ought to be on the community. And we look at the staff's proposal, and the focus is on the developer. We want to find out what's necessary to fund the shortfall of the development project as demonstrated by the developer. So the staff focuses on the developer. District 87 would like the focus to be on all of us, on the taxing bodies.
Thank you, Mr. Pratt. Can I ask one more follow-up question?
Of course.
And this is actually for Mr. Juergens.
Okay.
Thank you. I really appreciate your going into detail. So given that that Section 8, as proposed by the school district, is intended to increase the number of options we have, do you believe the staff's recommended language in any way limits our options? I think Mr. Pratt makes a good point that it focuses on a specific option, but do you believe it limits our options?
I think the concern that staff has is that language starts with that we will structure all redevelopment plans and or project areas that implement, et cetera, to benefit along with the private developers by. And so I think it's that language that it talks about structuring all of those like that. Now, maybe if that's the intent, if we added some language ahead of that that said, you know, maybe we strive to structure all redevelopment plans or something like that. I think we just don't want to say something in here and there be a question about what that actually means, you know, down the road. So it's not that, I think staff sees this as the beginning of a discussion. This isn't the end of a discussion. And that these are the types of discussions we'll be having every time we come forward with these types of projects in terms of the limiting and all of that type of thing. So it's really just a matter of what the pleasure of the council is as to how how you feel comfortable structuring it. And I think that was helpful, but the question becomes what does the actual language say? And
Jeff?
so,
I'd like to add something there, the way we structure this. One of the reasons why we don't want to put an actual number in there, like 18 years or something, is because the future is uncertain. We don't know what projects are going to come down, and when that does come down, we will make sure that it's limited to only what the project demands, but right now we don't know what that might be, so we want the flexibility to be able to structure it according to the projects that may come down the line.
Yeah, and I think absolutely, I think flexibility is the key here. But I think the discussion about our focus is also very compelling, the notion that we want to make sure what we do benefits the community. I mean, that's why we were pursuing TIF, and economic development is for the good of the community. So I find the idea of trying to find a way to put that language in there very compelling, because I think we can without tying our hands or limiting our options, but at the same point make a pretty powerful statement in this document about the goals that we all have for this economic development.
We do have some in our policy, but actually,
Yeah, I mean, I know
Yeah.
it's elsewhere.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the goal of the
Yeah.
whole document, but if there's a way to include it there, I think it would be
Okay.
beneficial.
yeah, so certainly you could make a motion to approve the resolution with that red language in exchange for, what the staff had for subsection 8.
if I could ask Bob or Steve or maybe Jeff, I don't know who, when we approved Empire Crossing TIF, the TIF around it, the Empire Crossing is not for 23 years, right? Or the TIF is, but okay, I mean, let's
The
say,
development plan and the TIF are 23
but there's no guarantee that necessarily whose property taxes are frozen for 23 years, effectively.
I don't have that file with me, and I didn't know it was
Okay.
going to be asked that.
Yeah, yeah. If, in other words, whose property taxes in that TIF are frozen for 23 years? Or is anyone's?
Well, all affected taxing bodies that levy a tax in that area. Now, Empire Street TIF is a larger TIF,
Okay.
and
I'm sorry, I'm not being clear. Who, in terms of the city committing to saying you're not going to have to pay any more, PetSmart or whoever, who directly, in terms of our individual agreements with developers, is going to get a 23-year pass?
that's done on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, that's part of what I wanted to get across, is that...
The very first project you approved was 20 years, okay?
Right, so I did want to get back to the point that staff is always going to revert to 23 years. 'Cause that is not...
For a TIF district.
For a TIF district, but not for a specific project.
Yeah, I think you have to look at
Right.
each project on a case-by-case basis and the merits of that project. If it doesn't require the balance of the life of the TIF to make it work, you make it work for 10 years or 12 years, whatever.
Right.
And I think we just have to do a better job in negotiating each of those deals on a case-by-case basis.
I apologize for not being clear. My point was just, I think our staff doesn't necessarily just revert to 23 years for a specific project within the TIF. Right.
In fact, as the clock ticks, you don't have 23 years anymore.
Right.
So as you get to projects 2, 3, and 4, you can't even do a 23-year TIF.
Right.
You don't have that much time left.
Right. Okay. Let's see. Alderwoman Bray. Well, you both talked before, so that was just what I was looking for.
So as I'm listening to the input that we've received, in particular from Mr. Pratt, I wonder if a remedy for the staff's version of the resolution in regards to Section 8 could shift the singular focus from developers, where it says as demonstrated by the developer, and instead say as demonstrated by the stakeholders, because stakeholders would include developers and the taxing district. So the provision would read, limit the term of redevelopment agreements and otherwise ensure that the amount of any incentive to a private developer be limited to the minimal amount necessary to fund the shortfall of the redevelopment project as demonstrated by stakeholders in order to proceed with the redevelopment project. Could that be a consensus piece?
You just wanted to ask the council. At this point, I think we're, not only are we out of time, but we were supposed to have a council discussion on this. Does that address some of your concerns, Alderwoman Burgess?
Potentially, here's what I would say. I don't like rewriting things on the floor because I want our attorneys to have plenty of time to reflect on it.
Well, I had the floor, so I'm not sure why
No,
you
I'm
shifted
just,
away from me.
but the,
So I'd like to finish my thought.
Go
So I'm just wondering if they would have a reaction to that we could then incorporate into possibly
yeah, and
some
that's
changes.
right.
But,
and
Yeah,
that's the thing.
so Mr. Pratt has indicated, they're still willing to discuss potential language changes, so
All right.
that is something that would be a possibility.
The thing that we really were not intending this to be was a back and forth. And as Alderwoman Burgess suggested,
Right,
we
I
wanted to
think-
hear from the taxing bodies, but not necessarily rewriting a contract or rewriting an agreement on the floor, which is why, one way would have been to have had the people from District 87 or Unit 5 speak at public comment separate from us. And I think this is one of the things that we were trying to avoid. But it might be that this is okay. It might be that this is all right if this is the council's pleasure that we move forward with that. Alderwoman Bray.
well, and Mayor, this is to be a discussion. We have our community leaders here, so if you have an opportunity to have a discussion with them, I certainly think that's the spirit of what we're doing here this evening. And so I don't think it's improper to have that kind of
Well, we would have to suspend the
thought,
rules for that, yeah.
Or to just
Yeah.
throw out that idea for their reaction and possible weigh-in later. So thank you so much.
Right. Alderman Black.
Thank you. I guess this is a question for Jeff. So, again, I still lean towards District 87's version of their proposal. My question would be, and maybe I'm viewing this all wrong, I'm trying to think of this on a macro level and not individual projects. Suppose a developer would pass the ordinance with the red text, District 87's proposed language. 5 years from now, a developer comes forward and says, I have this great project, it's going to require a 23-year TIF. We don't kick that developer out the door. We open a dialogue and try to find some way to work with the school districts in that case. Correct? We're not putting a red line in the sand.
Well, I think that's what we're trying to avoid. Our concern is when it says structure all, that we understood that to kind of be the ask. Now, we can go back but we really need direction from the council as to, where you want us to go with this. If you want that red line in the sand drawn, or if you want some flexibility. And I think that's what it comes
So
down
what
to.
you're saying is the answer to Alderman Black's question, though, is it doesn't, this version, the staff's opinion does not provide us with the flexibility.
My understanding is that is what the school district wanted. They wanted that kind of, that red line. Now, I might be mistaken on that, but they wanted us to say, as you heard Mr. Pratt say, no more 23-year TIFs. Now, they've said there might be some exceptions to that, if there's a clear, I think we've talked about like a warehouse district or something like that. But generally, I think they're looking, and I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I think they're looking for us to say, we're not going to do 23-year TIFs anymore.
Right. And I guess I'm reading
Or that they're not going to be all in for 23-year TIFs.
Sure. And I understand that, and I respect that opinion. And I think that what I'm reading here and when I'm reading the staff backup material is that there's still the flexibility at some point down the road, even if a developer were to come to us under any language and we could decide to do whatever we want at that point in time.
Sure.
But the intent here, which is I think spelled out at a number of points throughout the resolution, is that we are committed to working with the school district to find compromise and common ground on some of these issues and to make sure that some of the financial impact is mitigated to the district. But whether we pass it under the blue text or the red text, city staff or District 87's proposal respectively, it's all the same to me because I don't think anybody's going to say, beat a developer, you asked for 23 years, forget it. I think we're open to that conversation, and then what would trigger it if there's a 23-year TIF under the red text would be that we would have to find some other way to compensate the schools or come up with a creative way, a creative solution to speak to that 23-year component, which is, I think, the whole purpose of this discussion.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, at this point, since we are several 100% above our budget of time, I'm going to ask if there is a motion either way, even if it is a motion for one version or another, or to postpone to a time certain this proposal. Okay. Yes.
I'll make a motion that we approve with District 87's suggested text in lieu of our, what is it, D8?
Okay.
In the resolution. Yeah,
Okay.
D8.
So there is a motion. Is there a second to that motion? Okay. The motion dies of a second. Is there yes?
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Mr. Juergens, do you believe if we gave you until next week, do you think based on this evening's conversation that the staff in District 87 could bridge their differences and come up with a new version of paragraph 8 that would meet everyone's expectations and concerns? I mean, I don't like to delay, but I want to get this right.
Yes, I think I see Mr. Pratt back there shaking his head very vigorously. So, yes, we could certainly do that. Our goal, I think it was several on the council said they'd really like to have this policy in place before the Washington Street TIF is created. But there's not necessarily any magic to that. That'll come up at the meeting on the 25th. We're going to have some discussion about that here in a minute. But certainly we could, we could postpone this. And I would just say, my own thought would be, maybe we can try and have it for the 25th. Maybe we can try and have it for the first meeting in July. But it's probably more important for everybody to be careful, comfortable with this, and for everybody to clearly understand, what it is we're saying and what our beliefs here are. So I think we could certainly come up with some new language that tries to address these new
It would be pushing us a lot and kind of contrary to the way we've typically wanted to behave, to have some time between the actions. But if we had this language ready on the 25th, you could vote it on the 25th and then immediately follow it with the action on the TIF. That would be difficult to do, but if you would want to do that, it could be done.
Okay. All right. And hopefully we'll stay within our budget time. So, is there a motion to, yes? Oh,
Yes,
you wanna-
I'll make a motion to that effect, that the staff go back and try to clarify the language of paragraph, was that D8? D8,
Yes.
and come back with a final version at our next meeting.
Third time's a charm.
Okay, and seconded by Alderwoman Painter. If everyone will vote in either aye or nay to that proposed motion. The motion carries. Alderman Matthey, how do you vote on this?
Yeah.
Yes, okay, the motion carries 8-0. There are no nays to announce, Madam Clerk. And then we go to, again, this is discussion only. There is no vote. Presentation and discussion only on the downtown East Washington Street. And we have 15 and 15 minutes, and I'm going to have to hold us to this unless the council wants to extend the time.
Thank you, Mayor. Interim City Manager Rasmussen had requested staff to kind of provide a general overview of the downtown East Washington TIF following our discussion on the TIF guidelines. And I think it's important that we had the public hearing some months ago, and we're at this threshold of having to take action or to look at re-advertising for a new public hearing. So we kind of wanted to make sure that we move the process along. I think one of the most important steps is this communication between both the school districts and the taxing districts and city staff and the city council on the benefits and the impacts of TIF. So the next proposed TIF that's being brought before the city council is the downtown East Washington Street redevelopment project area. Want to give you some locations here. On the west side of this 4.5 block TIF is the North Gridley Street. On the east side, it's bordered on North Evans. On the north, it's the frontage along Jefferson Street, and on the south, it's on East Front Street. Some of the major landmarks within this area are the former high school property. Where you see on the map that out area, that's actually the Lafayette Apartments. And then to the, that would be on the southeast corner of Jefferson and Gridley is the City of Refuge Church. And you'll see some other surface parking lots in that immediate area. Some are still...
I think we may have lost Alderman Matthey, but if he calls back, we'll get him back on.
Should I continue? Or wait?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
No.
So some of the surface parking lots in that area are owned either by State Farm, the Methodist Church, or PNC Bank in that immediate area. Also, the owner of the former high school property also has that parking lot on the northeast corner of Jefferson. And
Hold on for just a second. Jamie, are you back with us?
Yeah, sorry about the area I'm in having some power outages off and on, and it's affecting
Okay.
reception here. So
Okay.
I'm going to try to stay connected.
Okay, Bob is continuing. Go ahead.
So this was just a general overview of the location and the structures and development potential within this redevelopment plan area. So back in June 12th of 2017, the city authorized the redevelopment agreement between the city and Iceberg Development Group for the redevelopment of the former high school building at 510 East Washington Street. I think this date and time is important because we did execute a redevelopment agreement with the developer on this particular project, and there is a pending responsibility on the city to implement this TIF as part of that project. So we want to make sure that you're aware of that as we go through this process. So also on that same evening, the City Council approved the ordinance for PGA&V to conduct a feasibility study and draft a redevelopment plan for this area. Back in February of this year, the redevelopment plan was placed on file, and the City Council approved an ordinance scheduling the public hearing. And I think that was the time where we started this initial discussion on, have you had those discussions with the school districts? And because of my newness to the city, I was like, well, sure, we've had those discussions, but I wasn't aware of the level of communication that they were anticipating, and they did reach out to you all during that process. So I think tonight was a culmination of these continued discussions with both the taxing district, city staff, and city council. Back in March, at the Joint Review Board meeting, the JRB provided an advisory recommendation to approve the redevelopment plan, and then the public hearing was actually held on April 9th, 2018, and at that time, Mike Weber did make a presentation on the TIF redevelopment plan, and he is here this evening to kind of go over some last-minute questions you might have. And then this evening, we're having the overview of the East Washington Street redevelopment plan. So looking at our future timeline, on the 25th, we had intended to bring forward to you 3 ordinances. One was to adopt the TIF plan and redevelopment project. Number 2 was to designate the TIF area. And number 3 was to adopt the TIF increment financing for the area. Now, in accordance with the TIF Act, you have to approve the ordinances or take action on the ordinances within not less than 14 days, no more than 90. So we're kind of at this threshold of time from our April 9th meeting to hit that 90-day threshold of not requiring us to go back through the public hearing process. So what that would require is setting a new date by ordinance of the City Council, date and time, re-advertising that very lengthy legal description. We've already kind of gone through these initial discussions, held that public hearing. So the way we're looking at it is to bring that back to you, those 3 ordinances with a memorandum next week. And the potential action is, at minimum, we have to have the City Council introduce the ordinances to the, and you may table them, but we really want you to really consider taking action either up or down. But if you feel that you can't take action at that meeting, in order to meet that threshold deadline, we really need to at least introduce it and then table it for a future date. And I can pass the podium off to Mike Weber to kind of answer some of your general questions. I will say this, that the TIF redevelopment plan is on our city website, as is all our existing TIF and economic development redevelopment agreements, so you can kind of see that information there as well.
Mike? Thanks.
Mike Weber, PGAV Planners from St. Louis, Missouri, the city's TIF consultant. I'll be very brief. The impetus for this East Washington, or downtown East Washington TIF was the first project that came about that was driving this effort, and that was the Iceberg development proposal for the old high school building, or the former high school building, which later was a junior high school. Has a long history. It's a pretty substantial building. I would suggest that you go back and take a look at the pictures that are in the appendix of the redevelopment plan. It's in pretty tough shape, and it's going to be very expensive to bring it back to life. And the proposal at hand involves low-income housing tax credits, which you were aware of when you approved that redevelopment agreement. And after that redevelopment agreement, it showed the Illinois Housing Development Authority that the city and the local community had a commitment with doing a project like this. Those tax credits are very competitive, and it's the only way you can make a project like this work. From a pro forma analysis standpoint, this project is a low performer, so you need like 80% equity in the project, and 80% of that equity is coming from tax credits. TIF only represents like 2% of the deal, but it was the commitment of the TIF that helped them get the tax credits. So if you were not to follow through on your agreement with the developer and not approve the TIF, it's questionable whether or not those tax credits would be withdrawn or not, but I think it would shed a dim light on the community of getting future tax credits for other projects. So what really is at hand in terms of approving this particular TIF district is that first project. That doesn't tie your hands as to what the deals would be on other properties. We had some interest in some other properties that included the properties that were acquired by the city, including the old Coachman Hotel site, by a development entity that wanted to do some other mixed market rate and assisted rate housing there. But that doesn't mean you have to do a deal with them that's going to be comparable with the deal that you agreed to on the high school. It's a whole different set of circumstances. Whether or not the church is involved with that project will greatly impact the financial feasibility of it. So you're going to have to look at these future projects in the downtown East Washington TIF on a case-by-case basis, and there's no preset need to do 23 years on those future projects. In fact, it may be 2 years down the road before the second project comes along. It may be 5 years down the road before the third one comes along, and maybe even later than that on the fourth one.
And Mike, just to clarify, that project that you're referring to was not going to ask us for any TIF money.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, they were in a TIF, but they weren't going to be
Yeah, we
asking.
ran some, there were some initial pro formas on it, and the rents just don't support the redevelopment costs. And part of the problem was the church itself was being a real big drag on the project. And given the nature of the church and the significance of the architecture and whatnot, we were hoping that TIF would help be able to close that gap and include it as part of that project and make it an asset as opposed to the liability. Again, you'll see pictures of that church in the back end of the TIF plan, and it's in pretty rugged shape. But again, the TIF has to be approved in order to consummate a redevelopment agreement to do the TIF deal for that first project. But it doesn't tie your hands for other projects that will occur within that, or that may occur within the TIF district in the future. But you, as Bob said, you have a timeline in which you have to introduce ordinances, and you need to do that before the 90-day period from the close of that hearing. So what was that deadline?
It's July 6th.
6th.
Okay.
I'm happy to.
Question of Alderwoman Painter.
My question is, why do we have to TIF the whole area? Why can't we just TIF the old junior high where we know that a development project is moving forward, and if something comes up in the periphery, then expand it? Why do we have to do the whole thing at once?
You don't have to. And that's the debate that you have to have internally when you're looking at setting up a TIF. Do you do it just for
a project-by-project basis. That has to be at least 1.5 acres, but can't be any smaller than that. Yeah, you could have done a TIF just for this particular project. At the time, there was interest in trying to get off dead center with marketing the old Coachman site and some adjacent vacant parcels to try and get something to happen there. So while we're doing this, why don't we go ahead and include those parcels? Because it's a pretty arduous process to go through. And then knowing the personalities of economic development professionals, Austin wanted to make it even bigger. Okay? And that's no disrespect to Austin. He's trying to do his job to create a tool that creates an incentive for people to come in and take a look at, sort of a catch-22. If you don't have the TIF in place and you got immediate interest, they're going to walk away. So it's a balancing act, but me as a TIF consultant, I'm going to advise you to be as focused as possible. And that's one reason why we shrunk it back down to where it was, to where we had potential projects for this limited area within a relatively short period of time.
Okay.
But you wouldn't necessarily have to approve this TIF for that exact boundaries. You can always take property out.
All right. Thank
You
you
can take
very
it out
much.
ahead of time, or you can take it out afterwards.
Thanks.
I wonder if you could expand, so we could take it out even after we were to approve it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just by order.
If it were approved?
Yeah.
Other questions?
Can somebody help me remember why the church is included in the TIF?
Because of its condition and the great possibility that it's going to become vacant.
The Methodist Church?
No. The
Yeah.
City of Refuge
No, I'm
Church.
asking about I'm asking about the church.
The big
church
Methodist church is not in the TIF area. Their parking lot, part of their
block.
parking lot
I'm
is.
sorry, I moved myself over one. I'm sorry.
Okay. Other questions, comments? Thank you. Anything else from the council? Because this was not something that was going to require an action. Okay. Next, we move and we'll turn this over to Mr. Jurgens. Discussion and ordinance amending the city code to clarify provision on agenda management. Mr. Jurgens.
Thank you. If you give me a minute to... As the council may remember, last October of 2017, we started a discussion on agenda management, and we have been working internally as staff to try and come up with some different ways to address and more formalize how we set the agenda and talk about various issues in the city. So tonight we wanted to kind of preview one of the concepts that we've come up with, have some discussion, see what the council thinks, see if there might be some other ideas. So if it's all right with the council, I'd like to kind of just go through this. I just have 2 or 3 slides, and I'll kind of explain the overall process, and then I think you'll see how it all kind of fits together. The nuts and bolts of this is that the city manager would be primarily responsible for setting the agenda, putting on the agenda the things that he believes to be in the best interest of the city. In addition to that, initiatives of the alderman or the mayor can also be placed on the agenda using what we call the agenda initiative process, and we'll get to that in a second. The mayor also reserves the right to direct the placement of items on a regular meeting agenda. However, would also utilize this agenda initiative process for non-routine matters or proposals. So we'll talk a second about the agenda initiative process. So anytime that you as an elected official wanted to bring forward kind of your own specific proposal, and some examples up here include the expenditure of money that's not in the budget, maybe city code amendments, policy changes, specific ordinances or resolutions, creation of a committee, or revising a committee, or redirection of staff priorities. You would use a very simple process that we call the agenda initiative process. Requires the completion of a simple form, and I think we've got it. Oh, nope, I guess we don't. Thought I could click on that. We've got an example here of the form that essentially requires you, just one person, one alderman only has to, or the mayor. You don't have to go around and get 2, 3, 4, 5 other people to sign off on this like we do our current aldermanic request form. Only one person would have to sponsor it, and then it would be brought forward at a committee of the whole to discuss. The form basically has you just list your name, what the proposed initiative is, has you estimate the city staff time to research and propose a full council memo on it, the estimated cost of the proposed initiative, whether it would require a budget amendment, and what city programs or staff activities would be cut or reduced in lieu of the proposed initiative. And those are all things that came from previous council discussions we've kind of had and workshops on how you're potentially going to redirect for individual initiatives. So this form would be filled out. It would then be placed on a committee of the whole. At each committee of the whole, we would have a designated place where we talk about upcoming agendas. Part of that would be these agenda initiatives. At the committee of the whole, you could vote to have this placed on a future city council agenda for further action or consideration. You could move to have staff evaluate and prepare an analysis of the initiative and then have it brought back for council discussion, or you could deny further consideration of it. So you can think of any number of initiatives that, you may have seen come forward over the past few years. Maybe it's to, create a new park, in the parking lot between City Hall and the police station. All right, so it's easy enough. You put your name on there, you say what you want to do, you fill out the things, and then it would come forward at the committee of the whole. And instead of you going to the city manager and saying, hey, city manager, I want you to, focus the people on creating a park, behind City Hall, the city manager could then say, okay, well, we've got a process for that. We're going to bring it to the committee of the whole. We're going to see if a majority of the council wants staff to evaluate that or spend time on that. And then we'll see if, what we want to do with that. So it kind of is really designed to kind of put it back on those initiatives, back to see if there's majority support before too much time gets involved in that. So we get back to the committee of the whole. So at the committee of the whole, we would designate a portion of that meeting to preview upcoming agenda items. We talk about we'd have a city manager report. A lot of you have seen kind of the report we're using currently. We're at a very high level. The city manager will put on some future upcoming agenda items. So he would report at the committee of the whole on these non-routine items. We define non-routine items as expenditures in excess of $250,000 or development agreements, city code amendments, implementation or modification of policies. So those types of high-level things that are not routine would just be a simple form. City manager would say, hey, council, these items are going to be coming up either at the next meeting or the meeting after that. This is just a heads up. If the council wants to say, hey, I don't think we should talk about that item, or I don't want that item to come forward, then the council can debate that and have that discussion as a whole and give further direction to staff. Then beyond the city manager report, we'd also have these agenda initiatives, and again, those are the initiatives of the elected officials. So that is kind of in a nutshell, the structure that we've talked about, and we wanted to have some future discussion on tonight. In the materials, I've talked about in the council memo, there are probably endless ways that you can approach agenda management, and the communities do it differently. I put in there, I think, Peoria, Joliet, and Champaign. And again, this is just based on what I was able to ascertain from their code. We haven't had time to have a lot of discussions, about the practicality of how some of these communities do it. But again, we just wanted to bring this forward for further discussion and direction at this point.
Okay. Council discussion. Alderman Sage.
Maybe just to level set a little bit, Jeff, too. I know that the material that's in front of us, the ordinance that's in front of us, I think has been part of numerous conversations during the city manager's 3-on-1 alderman meetings. I think staff and the mayor have had multiple conversations reviewing this. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's correct. And we started this out with the aldermanic request form to review how agenda management was taken, and we began to craft an ordinance that we thought all of the aldermen could agree to in terms of a policy. And after much discussion, this is the proposal that we came up that we thought most incorporates that. We also went through with each alderman, and if my memory serves me correct, this final version was something that everyone could work with.
Sure. Okay. And I'll maybe wait to hear some other conversation first, maybe, but would have some additional comments.
Actually, just as a question that I would have is what problem or were we trying to solve with this? Of anyone? Yeah. You look like you're about ready to hit. Okay. Alderman Bray.
So I'm supportive of taking hold of our agendas so that we become more efficient and effective in our meeting styles. Also so that we're dedicating staff time and the resources that we have in a very intentional manner. So I appreciate the opportunity to weigh in on this, and as been made mention, everyone's weighed in, and thank you so much, Jeff, for your sweat equity in putting together something here that's a very fair and balanced manner in which to take on the business of our city.
Alderwoman Howman.
For me, to fill out the aldermanic request form and try to get 5 people when you don't have a chance to discuss it. I mean, this would give us an opportunity to do a thumbs up or a thumbs down going forward before there's a great deal of staff time involved. And we all hear the same message. So if I have something that I want to put forward, I can ask for the discussion at the committee of the whole, and all 9 of us, or the other 9 of us, are hearing the same message at the same time.
Alderman Black.
Yep. So thank you, Jeff. I guess I have a question. Is that suppose that one alderman or the mayor could bring up a proposal, and it can be voted down by the city council at that point in time at a committee of the whole. Is there a time frame before such topic would have to come back?
There isn't anything in the current ordinance. I have seen some communities that will do that. They'll say if something is defeated, it can't come back for another 6 months or something like that. So if that's something that the council wanted to consider, you certainly could do that.
So the parking lot at Park over here could just come back conceivably month after month if, say Kim was advocating for it?
If Kim just would not stop with that idea, yes. But, and part of the problem, things can change, circumstances can change. So if you look at something like that, you might say, but, maybe that can be waived by a 2/3 vote or, something like that or whatever.
Or just a minor inconvenience for every meeting.
Yeah, exactly. So,
So you're envisioning a formal vote then? At each?
Say that again?
If someone were, let's say, I'll go back just because Alderman Black brought it up. So let's say Alderman Ray wanted the park in the back, and she kept. So would we formally vote on it?
Yeah, at the committee of the whole, you would.
Committee of the whole.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And again, not for a park, but you'd vote to talk. You're voting to bring it forward to a future agenda.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Mm-hmm. And there's no legal issues with us doing that at the committee of the whole. Alderwoman Painter.
I'm in favor of this because I'd like to get a handle on our soul-crushing 5-hour meetings that we have on a regular basis. That's pretty long. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions?
Mayor?
Yes.
Just to weigh in on this too, we've had a problem with for a long time that this solves is this gives a quote-unquote, calendar of what our discussions are going to be for the next month for the residents of the community. I've received numerous complaints since I've been on council that people didn't know we were talking about subjects. And so with this new process, if we vote that, yes, we're going to talk about something in an upcoming meeting, we're kind of putting out a schedule of here's what we're going to talk about for the next 2 city council meetings. So if it's important to you as a resident and if you have comments, you have time to get with your aldermen or get your thoughts out or come to the meeting and present public comment. And you know, there's been many things that we have voted on that people didn't find out about until after the vote has already occurred. So I see this as a step in the direction of providing better transparency to allow folks that opportunity to participate in their government.
One of the things that the previous city manager and I had talked about was when he had a plan, he would have a plan out for a couple of months, but it was very, very loose. And I think his concern about even letting it out or emailing it to the council was that people would expect things to be on certain dates, and sometimes they did not appear on certain dates because you have to understand scheduling means we may have a situation here where we have to shift something back and forth. And I think everybody needs to understand those kinds of issues as well. And I think Mr. Rasmussen has been very good. I want to commend you. You know, you've been open to that and sharing that, I think, with the council, especially in recent weeks.
Yeah, a good example of that is the fact that we very much wanted to talk about the downtown work plan, the amount of money that is in that, and how you want to prioritize that. But in the middle of that, this big discussion of TIF came up, which took a lot of staff time, and so we simply had to move that back, and we are going to take that up. But this way, by using this plan, you'll see that it's there, and it's just shifted down a little bit because we've got other more pressing priorities.
Others. And my only concern is, Mayor, is that as a structural change, and it is what its implications are. I mean, I think we can be transparent with this. It seems to put a mayor in a situation as a legislator, and a mayor is a member of council, but a mayor is also an executive. Mayor doesn't have a vote. Usually, mayor has a veto. Mayor has other kinds of issues. So that would be my concern with this, particular proposal. But because structures are for long term, and structures are anytime you're changing who has what authority to do what. And anyway, anything else before we finish this? All right.
So then I would say then, based on the conversation tonight, I would ask if we can go ahead, because it sounds like we have consensus on the council, to put this on the agenda for next week to vote on.
Yes, we can do that.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else? All right. At this point, going back, is there a motion to adjourn? Moved by Alderwoman Schmidt. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by several people, including Alderwoman Bray, who's got her light on. That's why I'm including her. Okay. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Thank you, Jamie. Take care.
Thank you.